Nebraska's agricultural heartland, a foundational pillar of America's food security, confront a covert yet pervasive threat from Chinese influence, perpetuated by the complicity of Governor Jim Pillen and Senator Pete Ricketts, whose leadership has betrayed the state's agrarian legacy. This heartland, renowned for its fertile plains and robust output, sustains the nation's food supply, yet its integrity is jeopardized by foreign encroachment. Chinese entities, primarily Syngenta under the ownership of state-controlled ChemChina, directly hold a modest 1,200 acres of Nebraska farmland, a seemingly small figure that belies the true scope of their dominance. Through an intricate network of investments, leases, and strategic business partnerships, firms like Smithfield Foods, acquired by China's WH Group, exert indirect control over an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 additional acres, posing a profound risk to national security due to their proximity to critical sites like Offutt Air Force Base. This dual threat of espionage and food supply disruption underscores the urgency of the situation. President Donald Trump's National Farm Security Action Plan, unveiled on July 8, 2025, emerges as a decisive response, seeking to ban foreign land purchases by adversarial nations and strengthen oversight through the Agricultural Foreign Investment Disclosure Act. This initiative imposes stringent penalties, including fines up to 25% of land value, to deter noncompliance and classifies farmland near military installations as vital national security assets. Despite this federal effort, Nebraska's leaders have failed to align with these protective measures, revealing a troubling legacy of inaction. Pillen and Ricketts, deeply entangled in investment schemes and business ecosystems linked to Chinese corporations such as Syngenta and Smithfield Foods, have permitted these acquisitions to flourish over decades, driven by personal financial gain rather than patriotic duty. Their complicity reflects a calculated betrayal of Nebraska's farmers, who rely on the land's independence for their livelihoods. The state's economic dependence on China, evidenced by $2.2 billion in annual exports of soybeans, corn, and beef, further complicates this crisis, creating a vested interest in maintaining lucrative trade ties that overshadow security concerns. This reliance has fostered an environment where foreign influence thrives, bolstered by a naive populace that trusts its leaders without scrutiny and a complicit legislature that has delayed robust restrictions until federal pressure intervened. This essay delves into the limited yet critical direct Chinese ownership, the vast indirect influence through investments and partnerships, the intricate business networks of Pillen and Ricketts, and the systemic corruption that demands federal intervention. Only through such action can Nebraska's farmland be reclaimed from foreign control, ensuring its role as a bastion of American agriculture remains unassailable. Part 1. Chinese land ownership and its disproportionate impact. Chinese entities, predominantly Syngenta under the ownership of state-controlled ChemChina, directly possess approximately 1,200 acres of Nebraska farmland, a mere fraction when measured against the state's expansive and richly productive agricultural landscape. This modest direct ownership, however, is vastly overshadowed by the extensive indirect influence wielded by Chinese interests, estimated to encompass 5,000 to 10,000 additional acres through an intricate network of leases, contracts, and strategic partnerships. Among these, Smithfield Foods, acquired by China's WH Group in 2013, plays a pivotal role, extending foreign control via agreements with Nebraska farmers that amplify Chinese economic reach. The true significance of this influence transcends the limited acreage, residing in its strategic implications, particularly the proximity to critical military installations such as Offutt Air Force Base. This positioning heightens concerns of potential espionage, while the risk of disrupting America's food supply chain poses a grave threat to national security, exposing vulnerabilities in the nation's agricultural backbone. Governor Jim Pillen and Senator Pete Ricketts have consistently failed to confront this escalating danger, permitting Chinese firms to establish deep economic roots within Nebraska's framework through operational hubs in Waterloo and Omaha. These facilities, employing over 300 local workers, foster a troubling dependence that undermines state autonomy. The National Farm Security Action Plan, introduced by President Donald Trump on July 8, 2025, directly addresses this crisis with a resolute ban on Chinese land purchases and the imposition of severe penalties for non-compliance, including fines reaching up to 25% of land value. This policy lays bare Nebraska's prolonged inaction, a failure compounded by the complicity of its leaders, who have allowed Chinese and Chinese-linked investors to acquire property with impunity for decades. This unchecked proliferation is facilitated by Pillen and Ricketts connections to investment schemes that blend American and Chinese financial interests across multiple tiers, enabling foreign entities to exploit Nebraska's resources. Though modest in direct land ownership, this influence erodes America's agricultural sovereignty by establishing a foothold for broader control, threatening the integrity of the nation's heartland. The urgency of this situation demands immediate federal scrutiny to thoroughly assess the scope of Chinese dominance, dismantle the networks facilitating it, and safeguard national interests. Nebraska's leadership has betrayed its farmers and the country by allowing this infiltration, a lapse that requires robust intervention to reclaim the state's agricultural independence and protect America's food supply from foreign exploitation. Part 2. Jim Pillen's Business Ecosystem and Chinese Investment Ties. Governor Jim Pillen's Pillen Family Farm stands as a dominant entity in pork production, generating approximately 1 million hogs annually across Nebraska, South Dakota, and Iowa, deeply embedding it within a complex business ecosystem that relies heavily on Chinese-linked entities. At the forefront of this network, Smithfield Foods, acquired by China's WH Group, operates as a primary buyer, purchasing vast quantities of Pillen's hogs and directly integrating Chinese influence into his supply chain through its processing and distribution operations. This first-tier relationship extends to Syngenta's seed operations in Waterloo, owned by state-controlled ChemChina, which supplies local farmers who provide essential feed for Pillen's livestock, establishing a critical second-tier connection to Chinese corporate interests. The ecosystem further expands through global suppliers of agricultural chemicals, many of which originate from Chinese firms, entangling Pillen's operations in a broader network of foreign influence that spans multiple tiers of production, distribution, and support. Investment firms like Berkshire Hathaway, with significant stakes in agricultural companies such as Corteva, likely intersect with Pillen's personal wealth, forging additional financial links to markets influenced by Chinese capital and reinforcing his economic dependence on these entities. The Nebraska Farm Bureau, a powerful lobbying force within the state, plays a pivotal role in this ecosystem, advocating for trade policies that prioritize economic growth and international commerce over restricting foreign ownership, thereby aligning seamlessly with Pillen's business interests and perpetuating the acceptance of Chinese involvement. Despite Pillen's public endorsement of LB 644, a legislative measure designed to bar Chinese Communist Party-linked firms from receiving state tax credits, his actions appear superficial and reactive, spurred by federal pressure from initiatives like the National Farm Security Action Plan rather than a genuine commitment to safeguarding Nebraska's agricultural sovereignty. This legislative stance masks his deeper complicity in Chinese investment schemes, where direct and indirect business ties, spanning supply chains, investment portfolios, and lobbying influences, undermine the state's independence and expose a troubling prioritization of personal gain. Pillen's reliance on these foreign connections betrays Nebraska's farmers, who suffer from the erosion of local control over their land and markets, a betrayal that jeopardizes national security. The urgency of this issue demands a federal investigation to expose these conflicting interests, unravel the extent of Chinese influence within Pillen's operations, and dismantle the networks that enable foreign domination, ensuring the protection of America's agricultural heartland from such exploitative entanglements. Part 3. Pete Ricketts and the Ricketts family's Chinese-linked investments. Senator Pete Ricketts, who served as Nebraska's governor from 2015 to 2023, alongside his affluent family renowned for founding TD Ameritrade and owning the Chicago Cubs, is deeply entangled in investment schemes with significant and troubling Chinese connections that compromise the state's integrity. Ricketts holds substantial stakes in Shoals Global Investments, a Beijing-based firm intricately tied to West China Cement, a company controlled by the Chinese government through its Anhui Province Authority, establishing a direct and undeniable financial conduit to the Chinese Communist Party. During his tenure as governor, Ricketts actively fostered trade relationships with China, most notably through a sister state agreement with Shaanxi Province, a policy that opened the door for firms like Syngenta to expand their operational footprint across Nebraska, embedding foreign economic influence deep within the state's agricultural sector. His recent acquisition of 3,459 acres in the Pine Ridge area for recreational hunting purposes underscores the unchecked control exerted by the elite over land markets, casting a profound shadow over transparency and equity in land ownership practices, suggesting a privilege that prioritizes personal interest over public welfare. The Ricketts family's expansive business ecosystem encompasses a broad network of financial institutions supporting TD Ameritrade and agricultural suppliers sustaining Ricketts ranches, with second-tier connections extending to Syngenta's seed operations, further linking their enterprises to Chinese corporate interests and amplifying foreign reach. Conservative advocacy groups like the Club for Growth, substantially funded by the Ricketts family, champion free market policies that tolerate and even encourage foreign investment, exerting considerable influence over Nebraska's legislative agenda and perpetuating a climate conducive to Chinese economic penetration. Despite Ricketts' recent co-sponsorship of the AFIDA Improvements Act aimed at enhancing oversight of foreign land purchases, his earlier inaction during his governorship and his ongoing financial investments in Chinese-linked entities reveal a troubling pattern of complicity in land acquisition schemes orchestrated by foreign powers. This duplicity undermines national security by allowing Chinese entities to gain strategic footholds in America's heartland, a betrayal that jeopardizes the state's agricultural sovereignty. The persistence of these investments demands federal accountability to investigate Ricketts' conflicting interests, unravel the depth of Chinese influence within his family's business network, and dismantle the mechanisms that enable foreign domination, ensuring the protection of Nebraska's farmland and the broader national interest from such exploitative financial entanglements. Part 4. Systemic corruption and public naivety enabling Chinese influence. Nebraska's legislature, heavily swayed by the influential agribusiness lobbies such as the Nebraska Farm Bureau, has historically turned a blind eye to the creeping encroachment of Chinese land ownership, with significant legislative measures like LB 1301 only emerging under the intense pressure of federal scrutiny. This belated action highlights a systemic failure to prioritize national security over economic interests, a lapse that has allowed foreign influence to take root. Elected officials, including Governor Jim Pillen and Senator Pete Ricketts, hold substantial investments in agriculture and finance, with many of these portfolios overlapping with Chinese-linked firms, creating glaring conflicts of interest that undermine their duty to protect the state. Berkshire Hathaway, a dominant economic force in Nebraska with significant stakes in companies like Corteva, amplifies this issue by exerting considerable influence over the state's economy and political landscape, further entrenching ties to markets influenced by Chinese capital. The state's populace, deeply trusting and heavily dependent on agriculture for its livelihood, readily accepts the assurances of its leaders, remaining largely unaware of the financial ties that bind Pillen and Ricketts to Chinese investment schemes. This naivety is perpetuated by widespread misinformation, such as exaggerated reports of foreign ownership that distort public perception, while a 2023 legislative study downplaying the impact of land value changes serves to mask the true extent of the threat posed by foreign control. Chinese firms like Syngenta, owned by ChemChina and Smithfield Foods, under WH Group exploit this environment through their direct ownership of 1,200 acres and extensive indirect influence over an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 acres via investments, leases, and contracts. This dual approach allows them to dominate key agricultural sectors and strategic locations, including near Offutt Air Force Base, heightening espionage and food security risks. The failure of Pillen, Ricketts, and the legislature to curb these schemes reflects a deep-seated systemic corruption that prioritizes profit and personal gain over the security of Nebraska's farmland and the nation. This corruption is sustained by a combination of elite financial interests and public ignorance, creating a fertile ground for Chinese influence to flourish unchecked. A federal investigation becomes essential to expose these illicit ties, educate the public on the realities of foreign ownership, and dismantle the structural mechanisms that enable Chinese domination of Nebraska's agricultural heartland, ensuring the protection of America's food supply and the restoration of state sovereignty. Conclusion: reclaiming Nebraska's farmland. Nebraska's agricultural sector, though directly impacted by a mere 1,200 acres of Chinese ownership under entities like Syngenta and ChemChina, confronts a profound and insidious threat from the extensive indirect influence exerted by Chinese firms through a vast network of investments, leases, and strategic business partnerships. This influence, estimated to span 5,000 to 10,000 acres through companies like Smithfield Foods under WH Group, jeopardizes the state's agrarian stability and national security, particularly near critical sites like Offutt Air Force Base. Governor Jim Pillen and Senator Pete Ricketts, deeply entangled in Chinese-linked financial schemes via their ties to Smithfield, Syngenta, and firms such as Schultz Global Investments, have betrayed Nebraska's farmers, prioritizing personal enrichment over the welfare of the state's agricultural community. Their expansive business ecosystems, bolstered by the economic might of investment giants like Berkshire Hathaway and the lobbying power of groups like the Nebraska Farm Bureau, sustain a corrupt system where Chinese influence not only persists but flourishes, eroding local control and autonomy. The state legislature's persistent inaction, coupled with a pervasive public naivety fueled by widespread misinformation, allows this crisis to deepen unchecked. The populace, trusting in its leaders and misled by exaggerated or distorted reports of foreign ownership, remains oblivious to the financial conflicts driving Pillen and Ricketts' decisions, while legislative bodies have delayed robust measures until pressured by federal mandates. President Trump's National Farm Security Action Plan, introduced on July 8, 2025, provides a critical framework to combat this threat, employing a ban on foreign land purchases and enhanced oversight to safeguard America's agricultural integrity. However, this plan alone falls short without a comprehensive federal investigation that can fully expose the breadth of Chinese control, uncover the financial entanglements that bind Nebraska's leaders to foreign interests, and dismantle the corrupt networks undermining the state's sovereignty. Such an investigation must quantify both direct and indirect Chinese holdings, hold Pillen and Ricketts accountable for their complicity, and address the systemic failures that have permitted this infiltration. This decisive action is vital to protect America's food security, a cornerstone of national strength, by reclaiming Nebraska's farmland from foreign domination. It is equally essential to restore integrity to the state's agricultural heartland, ensuring that it remains a bastion of American resilience and independence, free from the exploitative grasp of Chinese influence. Only through such measures can the trust of Nebraska's farmers be restored and the nation's agricultural sovereignty be preserved for future generations.